Hi everybody, it's Catherine, and this is my favorite time in my little office here because of all the prisms that come through the window and to get to play with them. And I want to talk to you today about integration and how integration, being integrated in yourself, which means that you're not exiling any part of yourself as bad, is the new enlightenment. And so let's ask the question, what is integration? What do I mean? And how does it start? So being unintegrated is the way that all of us are to some extent, because we grow up in a family and in a culture where certain things are good and certain things are bad. And this happens with every single human being and with some animals as well. And so we have this internalized set of standards that some of our behaviors are good and some are bad. And as children, we can't differentiate our behaviors being bad from us being bad. We can only do that when our brain becomes more developed. And so, for example, if I'm a little girl and I get really excited and I scream, and somebody says I shouldn't scream, well, then I've just internalized that it's bad to be loud. It's bad to have a loud voice, even when I'm excited. It's bad to express myself like that, and so on and so forth. And then conversely, the behaviors that get us approval and rewards are good, and then we accentuate those in our personality, and that goodness in us becomes our ego, our conscious personality, our identity. And every single person, perhaps with the exception only of certain sociopaths, every single person has a story and an ego narrative in which they are good. Even people who have committed heinous crimes, violent acts against other humans, or genocides have a story that they are good and the people that they're hurting are bad. For example, Hitler was the savior of Germany, and him and the Nazi were doing the right thing and the good thing. And the Jewish people and all the other demographics that they persecuted and killed were the bad ones, were bad for Germany. So this is just an extreme example of what we do all the time. We go about our lives thinking that we're good. And when we don't feel good, when we do something that doesn't live up to these internalized standards that we have from our family or our culture, we feel shame. Shame is I like to call it a social reflex. Shame is the social reflex that we have when we've done something, said something, even thought something that doesn't live up to our family or cultural standards for what is good, and thus it is bad. So I was actually going to title this video "Why It's Good to Be Bad," because not that I want everybody to do terrible things or to do anything at all that isn't in line with their morals, but that it's really essential to our experience of spiritual expansion and really just human expansion and compassion and empathy for all beings, for us to internalize that we too have the capacity to be what we might think is bad. And when we own our capacity, our elements of ourselves that could do what we call bad, then we really widen our capacity for the whole of human experience and even for the so-called positive emotions. So let me give you a very concrete example, because this might seem a little strange or a little hard to follow. So this was about a couple months ago for me, and it was a weekend, and I was walking around just experiencing this malaise of this vague kind of anger, kind of angsty feeling. And being a shadow worker, in other words, being somebody whose life is dedicated to exploring the disowned aspects, the bad aspects that we think exists in ourselves, I said, okay, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm not just going to allow this feeling to float around like I know I can heal this. So I took a bath and I relaxed in the bathtub and I invited that feeling to expand and to show itself, to tell me where it was in my body. And it just kept going and going beyond my body, became this gray, almost malignant force. And I kept allowing it to go and expand with the knowing that it can't hurt me, it can't hurt anyone else. And eventually it became, I'm doing this waking dream with it, this journey. It became this figure of this, I called it the angel of destruction. And she was this kind of skeletal, zombie-like, horrific-looking gray figure that was the personification of this feeling. And I saw her, she was just raging, and then I just imagined myself as my higher self, like the strongest version of myself, who she couldn't hurt at all. And I imagined standing across from her and saying, what else? And I kept saying, what else to her, and I saw her in my mind's eye destroying the planet, murdering my whole family, torturing my husband, and she kept going and going, and I said, what else? So I'm allowing her, this aspect of myself, to be as big as possible, to really go to the limit. And this is essential, by the way, if you want to heal yourself, if you want to increase your capacity for everything. So I let her go, and pretty soon she had destroyed not only the Earth, but multiple planets. And so there I was as my higher self floating with her in space. And I said, what else? And the moment I said that, she began to change and transform. And she went from a skeletal figure to this silver, almost Athena-like goddess. And she had a spear, and she was looking at me with these piercing eyes. And she just looked right across from me. And I started to channel, and I just was moved to tell her, I need your power and your fearlessness to complete my mission on this planet. You belong to me. You are part of me. I need you in me. And she started to writhe. Like when I said that, she started to writhe, and then my body in the bathtub started to physically writhe. I was not trying to do this, but it was this physiological impact of this character trying to resist me, and me just calmly saying, you belong. I accept you. And the writhing continued, and she kept kind of going between this skeletal figure and this goddess figure in that writhing. And honestly, I kept saying calmly, you belong to her, for 15 minutes. It went on for 15 minutes, this phase of the writhing, and saying, you belong, you belong. And finally, after those 15 minutes were over, she naturally subsided, and she stood right in front of me and looked at me again with those piercing eyes, very proud. And I felt really, very strongly that she dropped her spear, and she stood before me, and she was willing to work with me and willing to be part of me. And so the process was complete at that moment. And that's a pretty graphic and extreme example of what integration can look like. So that was just my own process on that day. But I can tell you that after that time, I noticed this new confidence in me. I noticed this power and this fearlessness in me that is still months later very much part of who I am. And that is the part of myself that I integrated at that time in that visualization. And, even as a professional shadow worker, I can't tell you exactly the subconscious processes by which this works, but I can tell you that it absolutely works when we choose to accept the scariness in us, when we choose to accept, like for me, it was literally murderous rage. started with this vague kind of angsty feeling on a weekend. And when I really explored it, I realized it was literally murderous rage that was part of me. And what I also noticed after, in addition to reclaiming that power, is I noticed this incredible increase in my compassion for people who are incarcerated, who have committed violent crimes. And it's just this openness in my whole being that allows me to accept everyone. You know, not that I don't think people should be incarcerated who are actual murderers, but it's not about what I do, it's about how I feel. And thus, I can sit with anything. You know, I could sit with a client who committed murder and not judge them in the same way, not close myself off from them and their experience in the same way, because I've owned that aspect of myself. And also, I'm much less likely, having owned my badness, my capacity for this destruction, I'm much less likely to actually act on it at all, or to even contemplate acting on it, because there's no compulsion anymore. So what happens when we suppress aspects of ourselves is that, you know, our being wants to become whole, and so it'll naturally come out one way or the other. And how it usually comes out for people is some kind of compulsive or addictive behavior, or you might just shout something at your partner or your child that you didn't mean at all, and you wonder where it came from. Well, it came from your shadow. And so when we own our badness, when we integrate and accept that that is in us too, we become the safest people on the planet, because we're not going to act out of it. We're comfortable with ourselves. We recognize that that's in us, and we choose not to do it. We're absolutely less likely to do anything violent to anyone else because we've integrated ourselves. And so this shadow work and this radical kind of integration, and by the way, I did not invent this at all, but this radical kind of integration is, I believe, the future. It needs to be the future of our planet, that we start to do this very naturally and automatically, that we notice that some part of us we believe is bad, and we explore and really lean into, what if I were to expand that? What if I were to really allow that? And I can't tell you how many people I've sat with in my practice, who, like clients of mine, who are suicidal. And what we do is we often will simply accept that it's okay to want to die. And we keep expanding that it's really okay to want to die. It's okay to want to take your life. And miracles happen when we soften into that. Miracles happen when we choose to go to that place that's so scary and that, frankly, no one ever thinks of going. Like, just about everyone I've worked with has said, that's never occurred to me. It's never occurred to me that it's okay to want to die. And then, guess what? They lose the compulsion to attempt suicide. By some magical means, paradoxically, when we integrate that, when we really believe that it's okay to feel a certain way, that resistance inside of ourselves to ourselves fades away. And we're at peace, we're calm. And the poet Robert Bly says, the one who eats his shadow creates calm. The one who eats his shadow creates calm. So thank you so much, and happy integrating. Bye-bye.